and thank you very much for joining us in this workshop on how e-mobility can contribute to green recovery. We are Ernesto Feilbogen and Corinna, and we will be your moderators today. I would also like to thank our co-organizers, the Transformative Urban Mobility Initiative, short TUMI, which is funded by the BMZ, the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Well, as a matter of fact, e-mobility plays a very important role in the decarbonization of the transport sector. It can help to substantially bring down greenhouse gas emissions of the sector, especially if deployed in high-usage vehicles and also if it's supplied with a high share of renewable energy sources. Additionally, e-mobility also addresses other problems which cities and also countries oftentimes face, such as air pollution, traffic noise, and also dependency on oil imports. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has faced great challenges to the deployment of e-mobility, as for example in public transport, the ridership has decreased dramatically, and this has also put operators under severe distress, making investments, especially in e-buses, more difficult due to their higher upfront costs. On the other hand, it's also important that the recovery plans which we're currently making are consistent with international climate targets. So the pandemic also offers a great possibility and a unique chance to make economic recovery packages that fast-track the deployment of cleaner fleets. And today, we would like to explore with you how e-mobility can contribute to a green recovery of the corona pandemic by providing expert inputs with information on good practice for public policies, for example, business models for electric buses, but also job generation and capacity building in the sector. So now let's have a look at the agenda. Ernesto will guide you through.
Thank you, Corinna. We do have a very ambitious agenda. We have 3 blocks. The first one is setting the scene. We will start with a poll on e-mobility barriers, the impact of COVID-19 and recovery. Later on, Stefanie, setting the scene, the role of public policy for the development of sustainable electromobility. Then we will go to the second block that has to do with e-bus business models. We will start again with a poll on e-bus business model. Later on, business model to accelerate e-bus deployment. Anthony will join us. And we'll continue with the Bogotá transition experience to e-buses. We'll hear Felipe Ramírez with us. And then will be a short space for question and answer related with this block of business model. The third block has to do with training and job generation, training needs and job generation possibility for cities in electromobility. Emre will join us to talk something about this and training needs for productive use of e-mobility in Western Kenya. Marah will join us, and we'll have a panel discussion with the 2 guests that accompany us.
Right. Well, to start, we would like to invite you to participate in a very short poll on e-mobility barriers, the impact of COVID-19 and recovery. It will be posted now also in the chat. You can see it there at the right bar. So please participate and vote. So our first question is, what do you perceive as the greatest barrier for e-bus deployment? Is it the high upfront cost, maybe limited institutional capacity, the lack of regulatory framework, maybe also the perception of performance risk due to a lower range? Is it the atomized public transport, which is present in many countries, or maybe the market readiness? Ernesto will introduce you to the second question.
The second question is the same. How do you assess the impact of COVID-19 on the uptake of e-buses? Options. The pandemic will slow the transition to electric buses rather than speed it up. Second option, COVID-19 will not delay the inflow of electric buses. Third option, green recovery plans and the climate crisis will accelerate the uptake of e-buses. 2 questions. We want you to participate, please.
So, while you are voting, I would warmly want to welcome our first guest, Stefanie Sohm. Thank you very much for being here live with us on stage.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Yeah, for us too. Thank you very much. Stefanie is director and co-founder of Move to Change. which is a non-for-profit organization dedicated to the acceleration of transformation, especially in low and middle-income countries. And Stefanie has also worked at the nexus of transport, energy, and climate policy with a focus on public policies in developing countries since 2016. On behalf of national and local governments, but also the private sector and international organizations, she supports the facilitation and design of frameworks and also action towards sustainable mobility systems. And today, Stefanie will give us insights into the role of public policies for the development of sustainable e-mobility. But first, before Stefanie starts with her presentation, we want to have a look at the results of our poll. As this might also give Stefanie further insights into what our audience thinks.
Which was the first question, Corinna?
Yeah, I will repeat it again. So the first question was, what do you perceive as the greatest barrier for e-bus deployment? And many people see that the lack of regulatory framework is the greatest barrier. Also, the atomized public transport structure, and the third is the high upfront cost. It's interesting.
It's not the first, it's the third. Yeah, very interesting. Let's go to the second question, the second poll that was, what do you perceive? No, this was the first one, yeah. How do you assess the impact of COVID-19 on the uptake of e-buses? 40% of the French says green recovery plans and the climate crisis will accelerate the uptake of e-buses. This is an enthusiastic answer. And the second option is pandemic will slow transition to electric buses rather than speed it up. Third position with 26%, COVID-19 will not delay the inflow of electric buses. We'll take the first one. Green recovery plans and the climate crisis will accelerate the uptake of electric buses.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's interesting to see these results. I'm happy that we have such an optimistic audience also, and they also highlighted the importance of public policies as a possible barrier. So that's exactly your topic, Stefanie.
Yeah, thank you so much for paving this great introduction. That was just a perfect part to show that it's actually about policy frameworks that we need to put in place to support this transition. And also, I would like to thank you for choosing the title of the session on how can electric mobility contribute to green recovery, because we ask a lot the question how we can make use of the money for green recovery to promote electric mobility, but we also, and of course it's important to use this momentum and to get the investments right, because we can only spend this money once, right? Yeah. But then it is also about the question, how can we use electric mobility as an accelerator for a green, and let me add, a just recovery, because this is what we also need, right? Even before the pandemic, we saw that certain groups of society had suffered more from the adverse effects of the transport system. And then during the pandemic, we saw these effects exacerbated, and they were the ones that were suffering most from lack of access. So this is something that we need to take into consideration. And I'm in my keynote today, I have the pleasure to draw from a policy document that my colleague Mark Major and I have had the honor to facilitate on behalf of the Sustainable Mobility for All initiative and the TUMI initiative, a working group on electric mobility. And I like to highlight here 4 elements that perfectly fit in today's session, highlighting the role of policy. But then I have a confession to make here. Actually, I hijacked some of these great drawings from Future Ahoy that you introduced on Monday. And it's such a great, fresh, and engaging way, right, of transmitting the messages that we need to make heard. So my presentation will feature these drawings, and thanks to the group of Agora Verkehrswende and LRE Studio for making this great novel available. So now let's start and have a look at the process, actually, the content and the purpose of this policy brief that we have been working on. And here you can see that this is the working group. The working group members are quite a diverse group. We have industry and also interest groups represented here. We have development organizations, agencies, and also the financing community. So on behalf of Some for All, we work with these members through interviews and facilitated discussions to lead to a jointly agreed document and policy recommendations, which you can see on the right, that is highlighting 7 building blocks and policy recommendation on different levels. So when we started discussing what are the barriers you're seeing in this field of why we cannot move on with electrification of the transport sector. And as you can see here, policy and legislation is a major barrier, and I'm glad that we just saw this confirmed in the poll, but also are to a certain extent the market and financial mechanisms that we have put in place. Now, to overcome these, we need a comprehensive approach, and these barriers cannot be solved by single actors, but we require a policy framework across certain levels and an integrated approach. The next step was that we developed to build the 7 building blocks of sustainable electrification of transport. And here you can see these 7, and they are split into vision, policy, and implementation. And from these, then, we developed recommendation for public policy making on 3 levels, on the international, the national, and the local policy community level. So drawing from this, I would like now to highlight 4 key areas that we think are worth today speaking about, especially with the topic of the session. And the first one is we need to give more attention to electric 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, e-bikes, pedelecs, and cargo bikes. The discussion has been very much centered on cars so far, and we see great potential from these modes to contribute to the mode shift that we need so urgently, and also to provide an affordable start for electric mobility. So these bikes are great in terms of affordability for less charging infrastructure needed, less road infrastructure needed, and at the cost we can provide them, they are affordable to a larger group of society. So there's really a transformational potential in these electric 2- and 3-wheelers we need to leverage in both the motorized countries, where we need to get people out of their cars and on their bikes, but also in developing countries where people do not have access because there is no motorization, and we need to protect them from car dependency. So here is a really great driver, and we can also create local jobs on this with these e-bikes for maintenance, for assembly, and also to provide services. Second, and you already mentioned that this is going to be a topic for you today, it's about public transport and the electrification of buses. So first of all, we know that we will have to go this route, and maybe it's now a question of time when we start and when we can make these investments, but we need to keep in mind people don't choose a bus because it's electric. They choose a bus because it's a well-performing system. So the message here is we need to look at both. If we invest, we need to invest in the service level, and we need to invest in the electrification. And this can start small, and we can scale up, and we can make experiences on the ground and build this into a larger deployment. We also need to anticipate this transition because it will come. And if we invest today in infrastructure, an example in the developing countries, we need to invest in a way that they can absorb and accommodate for these new vehicle types in the future, right? So that we don't have to retrofit and lose again these investments we've made. And then obviously, and you just mentioned it as well, it's all about the high upfront investment cost that we face. So we just need to change the perspective, because now it's a high upfront capital investment, but then the operations costs go down. And therefore, we need to adapt business models and support these through a new way of looking at our finances. Thirdly, very important, we need to link the energy sector and the transport investments for and benefits in both areas, because we need more cooperation of both sectors in general. The energy sector will have to provide all this renewable electricity that the transport sector needs. But also transport can contribute, because with a decentralized smart metering, we can have a flexible grid, we can have also additional capacity on that grid through the collaboration. So in that way, we need to package investments that go now in both sectors and make them coherent from the beginning. It's also creating more value for the private businesses that have to go in this direction. And then, last but not least, it's an important contribution to also to reduce fossil fuel dependency, to reorient the fossil fuel subsidies, and to create in-country value. Because the renewables that we're going to add to the grid is money that is staying in the country. It's not needed anymore to import these fossil fuels, especially for countries who don't have them. So this is another new way and a great way to create additional value in the country. And then fourth, certainly not least, is we need to adapt and develop the financing mechanisms to make them fit for purpose. So this can be about procurement procedures in the public sector that has a power, right, in defining what type of vehicles and what type of services I will source. I can give a guidance to industry and provide new incentives to invest here. Then second, we also need to look more on the non-financial benefits of electrification. We started looking at CO2 mitigation, which is very important, but there's more. There's about road safety, you mentioned it. It's about air pollution, and it's about noise. It's about mode shift. So all these aspects have to be taken into account. And then the way we conceive business models, and I saw that later you're going to talk about this, so I'm not going to kickstart this now, because there's going to be a great contribution later in the session. How can we conceive business models to make them attractive for the electrification of fleets? How we can also align the funding with the local priorities and support research and development that we need to bring the technological costs down at this point as well. So with this, let me just close this and highlighting again that actually electric mobility is a lever of the sustainable development objectives and our climate targets at the same time. So we need to look at this as a part of the entire transformation of the sector. And for this, we need these consistent frameworks. Like your Paul showed in the beginning, it's about having the right frameworks in place. And we need to connect governance levels across different hierarchies. We need to integrate the sectors, and we also need to look at all modes and get a little bit beyond the very strong car-centric view that we are having today. So again, I would like to highlight this paper that is also available, and that is a great tool, we believe, that has been facilitated with my colleague, and certainly the 16 working group members, they contributed their knowledge, so providing here guidance and orientation for policymaking on these three levels, and we believe it has a great value, and we would like to encourage people to take a look and see what's in it for them.
Thank you very much, Stefanie. Very interesting presentation, as you mentioned. In case the audience want to learn more about this, please have a look at the paper Sustainable Electric Mobility, Building Blocks and Policy Recommendation by Sam for All. The link is posted in our chat in the platform. You can also find further information about Move to Change in our virtual fair. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we need to move to the second block, and we always start with a poll. So let us make the next poll that has to do with business model. You have now the screen. Do you already have experience with the following business models for e-buses? Which are the following business model? Yes, I have experience with the bus leasing model. Yes, with the battery leasing model, or the pay-as-you-save model. No yet, no experience. 4 options related with the experience you have with business model on e-buses.
Very much for presenting this poll. And while the audience is voting, I would like to take the chance to inform you about a very interesting webinar which Tumi Wold, our co-organizer, and WRI, the World Resources Institute, is offering for next Monday, June 28, from 11:30 to 12:30 Central European Summertime. Which is on the monitoring of e-bus operations. And of course, today we're mainly talking about business models and how to finance the higher upfront costs. But of course, the next question that arises then is how to operate electric buses and also how to improve the efficiency of this operation. So in this webinar, you will be able to learn more about the operation of electric buses. And the link will also be posted now in the chat, so you can register. Thank you.
And now it is time to see the results of the poll, if they are available. That has to do with the link, the experience the audience has with business model and e-buses. Now you can see the screen. 56% no yet. Seems that it's something new for the people that are joining us in this workshop. 58%, sorry, 0.3, not experienced at all. Then 16.7, there is 2 with the same value. Yes, we have experience with bus leasing model and also with battery leasing model. In the last position, some experience in pay-as-you-save model.
Thank you very much, Ernesto. So please allow me now to welcome our next guest, Anthony Courreges, who will present precisely business models to us that help to accelerate e-bus deployment. Anthony is Senior Manager for Clean Transport Finance at C40 Cities. And he is working at C40's Financing Sustainable Cities initiative. In this role, Anthony is leading the development and also successful implementation of a range of city-to-city interactions and also technical assistance on urban transportation finance. Very warm welcome, Anthony, and please to our participants, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat, because afterwards we will also have a Q&A session.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. The poll you just showed is actually very relevant, obviously, for this presentation. I see that few people have had experience with this model, so you know, it's very timely, and certainly for me, it's better if people haven't heard of it. So let's get into it. Next slide. Right. So the question is, first of all, why are we talking about innovative or alternative models for electric buses? So because that's really, you know, why even talk about it? So this is the thing. Traditional models present very significant risk around e-bus procurements. Things may have been done perfectly fine until now with diesel buses, but when we look at electric buses specifically, they have very high upfront costs that diesel buses don't have. Also, municipalities don't have the technical expertise to manage a new technology like electric buses. Next. Right, so the lack of data around the technology of the reliability of electric buses, we've all heard horror stories around that, and the uncertainty around battery life is something that is, again, specific to electric buses. The operational risk is very interesting because we've heard, again, those stories from multiple parts of the world where the buses don't necessarily meet operating requirements. Can they finish the route? Is their range sufficient? So all those things bring risk that traditional diesel buses don't bring. Right, and the charging infrastructure. The charging infrastructure, again, is something that diesel buses don't have to worry about. What the cost of building the infrastructure, and also responsibilities around who builds the infrastructure. Is it the utility? Is it the city? Or is it the municipality? Next. Right, and so you know we're talking about things that can also add a lot of time. So this notion that some cities may have specific targets for electrification, and that those targets are so aggressive that going through traditional procurement may actually prevent them from meeting those targets. Next slide. Right. So the question here is risk. Those traditional transit models. The thing that they all have in common is that they concentrate risk on the owner-operator. So this concept of owner-operator, one entity, whether it's a public entity or a private entity that owns the vehicles, owns the fleet, and also operates them. So these models that we just talked about, they all concentrate risk on that entity, whether it's the financial risk, whether it's the demand risk of passenger demand and fares generated with that, or technology or availability of the vehicles. All that is concentrated on one single entity, which is the owner operator. So we're already starting to understand that electric buses present specific risks that are not usually present with other types of vehicles, and that those risks are heavily concentrated on one entity. Next slide. Now we understand that it's important to realize that not only do electric buses present specific risk, not only do they concentrate risk on the owner-operator, but now what's interesting is to realize that those entities who have to bear the risk under traditional models are not well equipped to mitigate and manage that risk. So in terms of the municipality, the risk of over-indebtment, capital budgets under pressure, especially in the COVID context, the lack of sometimes the lack of credit rating or not optimal credit rating, and the lack of technical expertise. If you click again. And now the operator. Most of the operators, especially in certain parts of the world, tend to be small. They tend to have governance issues, a certain lack of transparency around finance, and ultimately difficulty to access capital, especially for capital-intensive assets like electric buses. What we see is that those entities on whom risk is concentrated are not well equipped to manage it. So next slide. So what have we said? We've said that electric buses present very specific risk, and their risk profile is very different to diesel buses and traditional buses. We've seen that the risk is concentrated on one entity, and that entity is often not well equipped to manage that risk. So now what we're proposing is a new model. And you know, the models that we talked about in the survey, the poll earlier, well, it's exactly that. It's all relying on the separation from ownership and operation, which means that on the one side we have a model that traditionally relies on the concept of owner-operator to do everything. Like as we can see on the slide, municipality does everything. Either municipality or whoever is the concept of owner-operator. And then we switch to a model that we call unbundled, where we introduce a third party to own some of the assets, or even all of the assets, depending on what model we're talking about. But to basically take away much of the burden from the owner-operator, so that we end up with a model where on the one side we have an owner, and on the other side we have an operator. And the unbundled model is what we're talking about here, and it's basically the model that, you know, in the survey was presented to you earlier in the various forms. Next slide. So you may remember the previous diagram that talked about risk and risk allocation amongst the different parties. So now let's look again at what that risk allocation looks like under the alternative model of separation between owner and operator. As you can see, this risk allocation is much better. The risk is better distributed between the parties. In terms of financial risk, we see that the asset owner now bears most of the risk, and the owner-operator, so the municipal stakeholder, which now is not an owner-operator, it's just an operator or a municipal entity, doesn't really have to worry so much about that. The only thing that the city has to be concerned about is the affordability of the system, because that will still be with the city, whether it's on an upfront basis or on a long-term basis. The demand risk, well, the demand risk doesn't really shift, because the city still needs to guarantee demand, it still needs to guarantee the cash flow, it still needs to guarantee payments. However, the technology risk, which is huge, it's a massive thing for a lot of municipal stakeholders and operators, the risk around the battery electric technology is something that under this model, the city or the operator does not have to worry about, because it is something that is almost entirely managed by the asset owner, in collaboration with the manufacturer, because the asset owner tend to be better able to secure robust warranties from the manufacturers. And the availability means, is my bus going to show up at 6 a.m. every morning to start service? And is it going to be able to complete its route? Is it going to be able to meet service requirements? Once again, under this model, the city has very specific performance requirements that are set with the asset owner. And in this case, the risk that the buses may not meet those expectations is entirely with the asset provider, or pretty much entirely. So again, we see that those models of separation between ownership and operation present a much better risk allocation and a much better distribution between the different parties. Next slide. Now, we've talked about the fact that these models better distribute risk amongst the different parties. However, and this is perhaps, it's really the point of my presentation today, is to say that those models are great, and they can accomplish great things. They show great potential. However, municipalities still have a very important role to play to make those projects bankable and to improve the bankability of these projects. Meaning that these models are not a silver bullet. They're not going to solve all issues, and there are certainly things that cities, municipalities need to do early to create the right environment, to create a legislative and regulatory framework that enables the development of these models in a way that's bankable, in a way that attracts investors. They're not just going to work, and we've seen it countless times. They don't just magically work. There's a number of things that need to be done in order for these models to work at the municipal level. Right. So the key issues. What are those issues? The passenger demand risk, especially in the current context of a post-COVID world where ridership of mass transit systems, ridership hasn't gone back to pre-COVID levels. So the demand risk, meaning that how much revenue are we going to generate based on just passengers paying their fare? That risk is not something that a third-party fleet provider will be willing to take. Pretty much never. Operators can have poor governance. Again, we see that under the current models of concession with an operator, we see that operators, they don't tend to be a viable partner for a third-party fleet manager or third-party asset owner. And that means the exposure to the operator financial health is something that is a massive issue for a lot of investors. Frankly, I can tell you that most of the investors we work with, most of those fleet providers, asset owners, whatever we want to call them, they want nothing to do with the operators. They don't want to be associated with the operators, and they certainly don't want to risk being subjected to the financial health of the operator. And finally, the municipality credit risk, which is also a huge issue for in a lot of places. Click right. So what are the potential solutions? The potential solution to the demand risk is to create a structure where payments are based on demand, are not based on demand and are subject to performance indicators that have nothing to do with demand. So it doesn't matter what the demand is for the system, the payments will happen regardless. Now, the governance of operators is a pretty it's an easy one to solve. I mean, by having separate contracts for operation on one side and a separate contract for provision on the other side. Now, exposure to operator financial health. One extremely important element, structural element of all systems to implement is a centralized fare collection system. And we keep talking about this, but separating, and we can go to the click again to the end of this list here. The segregation of payments, making sure that the payment is not routed through the operator, is something that cannot be emphasized. The importance of that cannot be emphasized. So a centralized fare collection system segregation of payments early in a bankruptcy remote trust fund. We'll talk about that. We'll see what that looks like. Basically, the concept here is that payments are not channeled through the operator. Fares are not collected by the operator. If you go to the next slide. This is the next slide. So basically here, we want to just talk about what the issues and solutions I just mentioned, what that looks like in a very visual manner. So looking at from funding, financing, and all the capital project and operation. So we have those key stakeholders here. We have the municipality, we have the passengers, we have the asset owner that we just introduced, and we have the private operator, and then obviously we have the system itself. If you click now. Right, so the asset owner the asset owner is now been introduced to basically take care of the design, procurement, finance, ownership, and maintenance of the vehicles. And the operator, what's left to do is to operate. Click again. Right. So in terms of financing, again, the asset owner takes care of the financing, is a capital provider. It takes care of the infrastructure work, deals with the charging manufacturers, the charging infrastructure manufacturer, and deals with the bus manufacturer. Now, a critical element is that there is a separate contract for operation. So the operator is working directly with the municipality and has a direct contract with the municipality. And the asset owner has a direct contract with the municipality dealing with provision. Now this trust fund, what does it do? Well, it collects subsidies. And if you click again, it also collects user fares, which don't go through the private operator, but we have a payment that goes to the asset owner, and then another payment that goes to the private operator. So this is a full separation of ownership model with one contract from the municipality to the asset owner, a different contract from the private operator to the municipality, a payment from the trust fund to the asset owner, and another payment from the trust fund to the private operator. So this is effectively a model that summarizes a full separation of ownership from operation, and it is what we've seen to be the most bankable model, certainly the one that, from an investor standpoint, is viewed as the most attractive. So, this is there are shades and there are variations of this model. It can be applied to all the assets, buses, fleet, charging infrastructure, batteries, or it can be applied to just the batteries or just the charging infrastructure. It's all the concept of infrastructure as a service, right? So yeah, this is really the right structure that we've seen to be the most bankable, the most interesting, the most viable from an investor standpoint, and certainly the one that manages risk the best. So that's it. If you go to the next slide, it's just thank you slide. It was very good to be here, and I'll be very happy to answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Now I want to start with one question, if you allowed me. Your presentation was very clear, step by step, to understand the separation, ownership, and operation. We have seen such models working in cities in the side of Bogotá and Santiago. My question is, do you think it is also possible to consider this kind of model medium, smaller cities? It's possible that they do afford this kind of model, or any other restriction that they need to face?
That's a very good question, and you're right that we've seen this model being implemented in a lot of big cities. I would say that this model is actually designed to facilitate procurement by entities and cities that may be smaller in size, that may not have the financial capacity to procure extremely expensive assets on a sort of upfront cost. So we're talking about electric buses that are very expensive to purchase with their infrastructure. So this model is designed to alleviate that risk and to overcome that challenge. So yeah, smaller cities are perfectly able to implement that model. However, I would say a couple of things. The first one is that the reason it has been implemented primarily in bigger cities is because it requires some structural and institutional changes to the way cities procure infrastructure. And so smaller cities may not be able, in early days at least, may not be able to make those structural changes. So they'll use the lessons learned by Bogotá, by Santiago, and by other cities around the world to replicate those models. So there's going to be an element of learning, and just the smaller cities with not the same that don't have the same resources to just look at what has been done and to utilize those lessons learned. Now, the second element is that it is absolutely critical for cities to stand behind their projects. And what I mean stand behind is I mean that the cities have to guarantee the payments. If you think about an asset provider, their costs are fixed. It doesn't matter how many passengers are riding the system. It doesn't matter what fare policy the municipality implements. Their costs are fixed. Their costs are just on day one. They buy the vehicles, they buy the batteries, they buy the infrastructure. So that's it. And so these people, these asset providers, they have to see a payment stream that is guaranteed for the next, say, 15 years, for the whole duration of the whole lifetime of the assets. And so that's the big element, right? The cities have to be able to guarantee payments. They have to be able to say, we have a payment stream that has been allocated, and has been budgeted for. So those guarantees can, in some cases, be difficult for smaller cities, but it's not something that's impossible to overcome. And certainly with the right regulatory and legislative tools, it's something that cities can absolutely implement.
Thank you very much, Anthony. As Corinna mentioned, we open the chat tool that we can, in order to receive questions from the audience. And now we invite Ronnie, our colleague. She is taking note of the question and will address some questions for you, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Ernesto. Thank you, Corinna. It's a pleasure to ask the questions live on the stage, not from the back office. So yeah, to start right away, we have collected some questions. And Anthony, I would like to ask you, regarding the e-bus projects, what is the minimum recommended size of the buses per city to be purchased to become successful? Do you have an answer for this?
It's a great question. Again, with this model of separation between ownership and operation, quite frankly, there isn't really a minimum size. We've seen this model being successfully implemented on larger projects. We're talking 1,000 buses. A city like Bogotá. We've seen this model being successfully implemented at that scale, but we've also seen this model being implemented almost at the pilot scale. So we're talking potentially 20 buses. It really depends. It's just a matter of, the investors, different investors will have a different ticket size and entry point. Some investors are not going to want to work for less than $100 million. Other investors might be okay with $20 million. It really depends on what their investment strategy is, and that's also the benefit of this model, is that it opens the door to a different types of investors. So I would say that I don't really think there's a minimum size. Certainly 2 buses is not something that's going to interest anyone. But when we get to 15, 20 buses, we absolutely sure that some investors would be interested in that, especially if the process for the contracting process and procurement process is fairly streamlined and not overly complicated. Obviously, the more complicated, the more investors are going to be reluctant to invest in a smaller project.
Now I need to announce that the second guest in this panel is coming. We have some kind of delay in the connection. So Anthony, we will invite you to hear the second presentation, and all together we'll continue answering afterward questions. But let me introduce our new guest, that is Felipe Ramírez. Felipe Ramírez is General Manager of TransMilenio, has more than 10 years of experience in structuring, development, and implementation of projects with components in infrastructure, public policies, urban planning, and transport. At TransMilenio, Felipe has worked in different projects such as the contract and negotiation of new tender, the structuring and awarding of largest electric bus fleet in Colombia and Latin America, and the supervision of the construction of new depots, platforms, and stations. Since January 2020, Felipe is General Manager of TransMilenio, role in which he had led the recent tender and awarding of 1,485 electric buses. Felipe will explain us the Bogotá transition to e-buses. Very welcome that you join us with us, Felipe, and let us know what is going on there. Please, it's your turn.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's a really good moment to explain what we have done in TransMilenio for the last years, and how we are dealing with these new electric buses that we are hiring here in Bogotá. Bogotá right now, as you mentioned, has 1485 new electric buses, and it's something that really makes us very proud. Because of course it's changing the way we are dealing with operation and of course climate change in our city. So if we can go for the next slide, please. Next one. So here's just a small context. I'm sorry, I don't see the whole screen, but I will try. Yeah, okay. So this is a small context of the cable car that we have. We have this cable car that moves 3,600 passengers per hour. It has changed the way we are thinking the transport in the city, not just in terms of transport, but also the way people live in this area, changing not just the air pollution that we have there, but also giving some other options there. And this is the first thing I want to bring to you, because it's the first thing that we have done in the city in the last years in terms of changing the transport system of the city. Can we go to the next one, please? So this is what I'm telling you about, changing life of people, giving some complementary equipment. It's more a city project rather than a transport project, and it's very important for us. And if you come to Colombia, you have to come to visit this area, which is amazing, and it's something that we feel very proud of. It's actually a very poor area, so it's very important that we have gone there and changed how it works and how life is there. Let's go to the next one, please. So this is the map of TransMilenio. What you see there are the trunk lines. The red ones are the ones that have been built that are already built, sorry. And then the yellow ones are the ones that we are building right now. We have we are going to grow around 20% of the network that we have right now. And we are also articulating this to the metro line and to all the other transport modes that we have in the city. So we are not just going forward in terms of the electric fleet, but also in terms of other transport modes that are very sustainable for our city, and something that is going to change the way people here in Bogotá move and how they commute, in terms not just of time of commuting time, but also in terms of the quality that they are receiving because of the operation and also the emissions that we are dealing with in this public transport systems. Let's go to the next one, please. Just to tell you, we are a system that, not in pandemic moments, but before the pandemic, we were moving around 4 million people. It's something quite big, actually, because Bogotá, it's a city of 8 million people. And we have around 9,000 buses between the truncal buses that are the articulated and B-articulated ones, the ones that goes on these exclusive lanes. And also then we have 7,000 zonal buses that moves on the other streets and help to feed the truncal lines on the city. Let's move forward. It's also important, we are around 30,000 workers in this company. Let's move to the urban component. So this is the very, you can go to the next one. This is very important because these are like the main zones where we have been working with electric buses. Let's go to the next one. Another one. And this is showing you, you can go forward a bit more. This is showing you how we are increasing our fleet during the next years and during this year, actually. That's something that I have to tell you, probably the city that has by most of the fleet in the world during the last years is Bogotá. We have around 3,500 new buses in the city right now. And of course, in this number, I am also telling you that we have 1,485 new electric buses in the city. And these, we have been looking around the world, make us being the city with the highest amount of electric buses all around the world outside China. Right now, of course, I know this is growing quite fast, and actually Santiago de Chile is going as well is going very well as we are doing right now with electric buses. And I think this is something that we have to work in terms of the transport world to help all the other cities in order to have the biggest amount of electric buses that we can deal with. Because public transport must be an example, must be the leader for other sectors in terms of climate change, because of course is the one that is the bosses that is the system that is given by the public sector. So I think we have to be the leaders in these terms, and that's what we are doing here in Bogotá. Let's go to the next one, please. You can click again. So this is showing you how we are moving through the very bad or very old, better technologies to much better technologies, including the electric ones, but also Euro 6 technologies, which are helping us to reduce the amount of emissions that we have in the city. Of course, electric buses help us much more with climate change rather than the other ones, but we are moving, and we have right now around 70% of our fleet, or 80% of our fleet. We can say it's a clean fleet. And we are looking forward in terms of having much more than that during the next years and buying so much more buses that help us to replace these old buses that we still have in the city, and we don't want them here because, of course, it's not just about finance, operations, but also climate change and emissions in the cities. Let's go to the next slide, please. Another one, please. So this has been a successful experience. We have divided our contracts between two different contracts, fleet provider and fleet operator. This has been done because, of course, we were needing the banks and all the financial system to get into this project. And this was the way that we find was easier to do. Actually, some other cities has been copying this scheme because it has been very successful and helped us to have the most important resource in our hands, which is the fleet. If we have any problem during the operation, we still have the buses in order to be able to operate them. So this has been very useful in terms of what we have done in Bogota, not just for all the other fleet, but also for the electric buses. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is just showing, I will not focus on this, but it's very important. We have done like a whole system in terms of having these electric buses. We have built trust in terms of technical knowledge from the company. We have provided feasibility analysis for technical, economical, and financial and environmental, of course, structures of these contracts. We have aligned key actors in terms of what we are doing. Of course, we are a public company, but we have to work together with private companies, with societies, with different actors in the change that have to help how to get this in order. And actually, that's what we have been doing during the last years. And this is a very important thing. We are leader, manager, and articulator. And we have been a pioneer in terms of implementation of new technologies, not just in Colombia, but also in the region, as I mentioned before. Let's go to the next slide. Of course, this technology has some important things that we have been working with in terms of how we actually managed to be the first bidding process that was successful in terms of having these electric buses in the region. As you might know, not any of the other buses, electric buses in the region, has been are not operating because of bidding process. They are operating because they were put into another contract. I don't know how to explain actually that. But these electric buses have been added to another contracts that were already running in these other cities. In Colombia, in Bogotá, what we have done was a bidding process, and we have had to deal with so many problems in order to be able to bid these processes. But we have worked with minimum autonomy, manufacturer warranty, charging infrastructure, some points in terms of what we were giving to these bidding processes. So we were able to give it to be able to provide this bidding process and be successful in terms of having already 1,485 buses that were acquired by a bidding process. Let's go to the next one. Just to tell you, we have not stopped since many years ago, 2012. We were working with an electric bus. During the 2017, we acquired another electric bus, articulated one, and we are working. Let's go to the next one. We are working to have some more other electric buses, or actually hydrogen buses, in order to be able to keep forward, to keep working in terms of what we want to have in the city. Let's go to another slide. Okay, I will not stop here. It's just what I mentioned about the bidding process, some conditions and requirements to let you know. We have standardization of vehicle typologies, unification of institutional image, increasing seat capacity, compliance with accessibility regulations. Zero and low emissions is something very important for us in terms of structuring all these processes and the future ones. Improve information for users, because of course all this work is just given for them, and that's our main purpose, bringing these buses to the city. So all these are conditions and requirements that we have, not just in this process, but the future ones that we will have. Let's go to the next one. I will just finish right now. I'm out of time. Just to let you know, and here I will finish, This has been a very, very important process for the city. I think we have done an amazing work with an amazing team, not just in TransMilenio, but also the other actors that has been working in this. And that's why we can tell the world that we have today 483 buses already running in the city, electric buses already running in the city. And we have already hired another 1,002 buses to complete our fleet of 1,485 electric buses, which is something that makes us very proud. And it's also getting together with all the other projects that we have in terms of sustainable transport, and will make the city again a pioneer in terms of transport in the world. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope to keep on the conversation you were having. That was very interesting.
Thank you very much, Felipe, for this very interesting presentation. I'm really impressed by the progress Bogotá has made, and I'm already looking forward to travel again to Bogotá, hopefully after this pandemic. We would indeed like to continue with the questions that we have received from the audience. I have my colleague Ronja Kwasniok here with me in the studio, and she will share some of the questions we've received.
Yeah, thank you, Corinna, and thank you, Felipe, for this presentation. I have indeed some questions collected from the participants. The first one is from Urda. She's asking, have the cable cars increased ridership on the main bus lines? And how about pricing? Is there an integrated ticket price between the trunk and the main lines?
Yeah, okay, I will answer first of all the second one. We have an integrated rate, and actually, well, we still are working in terms of integrating the whole system, because we are in the transition. We're still in the transition. But the zonal system, the urban system, the trunk lines, the ones that are the articulated and be-articulated buses, and also the cable car are integrated. And also when the metro lines are here and the tram lines are here, we will integrate the whole thing in just one ticket, because it's very important for our users to have all these integrated. So we have been working very hard in this, and we have already this information. We have already this integrated in most of the system. Actually, what I have shown you of the 4 million people that we moved before the pandemic times, are people that it's moved in this integrated system. So it's very important. And I'm sorry, I forgot the first question was about.
The first question, it was about whether the cable cars have increased ridership on the main bus lines.
All right. So no, actually they haven't, or at least it's very marginal, because cable car moves the highest amount of people that the cable car moves is like 25,000 people during the day. But this is quite small as if you see for the 4 million people that we move during the day in the whole system. So actually it haven't increased that much, and it's very difficult to know if it's actually something that was increased. I think it's more people that moved from bus system that goes up there in this place where the cable car is, and they move to another transport mode, which is the cable car.
Okay. Interesting, thank you. Do we have time for some other questions still?
For one more, maybe?
For one more. Okay, maybe then I will ask another question to Anthony. Anthony, yeah, we have one question from Franco received, and he asks whether bus deployment should be linked to other urban mobility options, for example, BRT systems, or as first and last mile to MRT systems in very dense cities that need higher capacity modes. What do you think?
Quite frankly, I'm not that's not my expertise. What I can definitely say is that the models we talked about and the innovative models we talked about are applicable to different types of operation. You know, whether we're talking about traditional concessions or BRT, whether we're talking about concessions that that are existing with an operator, or whether we're talking about a completely new system that may be created by the city, so like a new BRT network. So those models are still valid. In terms of technology, however, battery electric can work in a wide range of different applications. We see that BRT it tends to be the element that cities go to because it's a bit of a low-hanging fruit when it comes to applying battery electric technology. It's mostly under the control of the city. They tend to be new systems, so there's in some cases there's no existing concession to deal with, so the model can be structured from the ground up, right? And even in terms of technology, BRTs tend to be they tend to be the easier way to use the technology. But yeah, I don't know. This is maybe not a question for me so much in terms of integration with other systems.
Okay, thank you. I think you have answered it very comprehensively anyway. Yeah, and unfortunately we ran out of time, so I have to hand back to Corinna.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, I think we have a question for one more time for one more question. Maybe a question we would like to ask Felipe. I think we've received several ones. Here I am seeing, for example, if Felipe could estimate the OPEX reduction from e-buses versus diesel buses. Do you already have some experience on this point?
Well, yeah, but we're still working on that actually. And what I can tell you, it's not just from the OPEX. Of course, the OPEX is quite lower than for the e-buses than the other ones. But the problem here is CapEx is still not that low. And actually, we have had to add some years for this bidding process that I was explaining to you. We have to ask for 15 years in terms for the e-buses, rather than compared, to the gas buses and the diesel buses that were for 10 years. This because the CapEx had to be distributed between more years than the other buses. So industry has still to work on making these e-buses cheaper, not just in terms of OPEX, but also CapEx, because cities have been dealing with this problem, and actually it's been very difficult for us. I have to tell you, having these 1,485 buses in Bogotá has been a lot of work, has been quite difficult because there are still some barriers in order to be able to have these buses in the cities. Because of course we have to deal with three different pillars, or I don't know if pillars is the word, but three different main problems here. The operational one, quality in terms of service for the users. The second one, it's climate change, which is very important, but also financial. And we still have problems here in the financial one, because if we would like to have all electric buses, then we won't be able to offer quality service, because we will not be able to have the amount of buses we need in the cities. So we still have to work on that. And we cannot separate CapEx and OPEX. We have still to work that together and understand how to deal with a higher CapEx that's still there in the market.
Okay, thank you very much, Felipe, for this insight, as oftentimes the argument of lower OPEX is is drawn in this discussion. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Felipe, very much for participating in the Transporting Climate Change Week, and also thank you very much for having you in this workshop. Thank you also, Ronja, for asking us these questions. And now, due to time, we would like to move to our third block, which is on training and job generation. I would like to welcome now our next guest, Emre Kiran. Hi, nice to meet you. Emre will give us some insights into training needs and job generation possibilities for cities in e-mobility. He is head of UITP Academy, and he has more than 17 years of experience in management training and business development. Quite impressive, really. And Emre is also having the global responsibility of public transport training programs, peer reviews, and also expert services. He has lectured service quality, process management, Lean Six Sigma methodology, and also e-mobility in marketing in different territories. We're very honored to have you today, Emre.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. And actually, when you say 17 years, so it was also surprising me every time. So thank you very much, and you welcome me. So hopefully everybody can enjoy the presentation. Of course, the topic is very wide, and I will try to make it very simple and try to make it very to the point. And hopefully with the question, we may go in detail if we have some time, for sure. So the training needs and job generation possibilities in the city who has the electromobility is very linked together. These two topics is very crucial when we are implementing, or when we are planning to implement electric buses in the city. Of course, this is one of the biggest challenges that we are pointing out. So not only the capacity building of the people, and also the management side is very important. So let me try to make some introduction. First, we need to check, how is the market going. Of course, it's linked to different drivers to understand how the new job generated by the new investments, and not only because of the new investment or the change in the technology, but also, we see the nature of the growth in mobility is directly affecting. So if you can move to the next slide, maybe we can see some details. So for the introduction, everybody speak about this. Of course, the figures a little change. Please discard the effect of the COVID at the moment, because last 2 years, like everybody knows this, because of the lot of measures in different cities, the demand also fluctuated a bit. But we assume that it will come to the same point in a couple of years. So we don't expect to have these figures change in very different direction. It means that for sure the mobility demand will grow. Even without the COVID effect, we expect beginning with next year, so the demand is rising. It's because of people started to move, of course, and also the population is rising in many territories, and it's exponential, and it's naturally born with the mobility need because of the civilization most of the time. And the ridership also growing with a path of 2020 to 2022, as we expect. In parallel, of course, the green transport demand will grow. So it is the fact. So in the graph, you see the CAGR is very huge. Normally, over 1 to 2 is we call it. It is very huge, and you cannot easily control the growth, but we easily see that the growth in mobility and the demand in transportation is going very fast, and not only because of the growth, and also cities are trying to change their rolling stock, and they are trying to put the new electromobility solution in their transport, not only bus, also for the other modes, of course, as we may already point out in the conference. So when you see, it's the general law, but all the supply, of course, creates its own demand in terms of course, the new jobs. So when you go to next slide, please. Here we see that a lot of people making a lot of research. Not only UITP we do, but of course the other companies in economy side, in global research companies, searching what will be the effect of this green source energy creates new jobs and how it will affect. It's not easy, I will show why, but to make a good forecast, but everybody are agree that this initiative will bring a lot of new job opportunities. You see some report in the one done by Ernst & Young. They say that together with Worldwide Foundation, they say that there will be a lot of new jobs coming from this green electric bus investment in different cities, and of course some perception. It's obvious that the new vehicles may decrease the demand in the new jobs, but of course, with this research, we saw that it will bring a lot of new job possibilities as well. And for example, in our report 2018, the economic benefit of the public transport are 5 times higher than the money we invested in public transport. So it is the same with the electric bus for sure. And the use of public transport, if we double the investment, would create 2.5 million additional jobs in transport sector for worldwide. So currently we assume that it's around 13 million in total directly linked with public transport. But with the side effect of this investment, we may expect around 5 million new job possible opportunities for the sector. So it's very huge. This is one of the motivation for the cities to invest on the green transport, I think. So it's obvious. Can you come to the next slide, please? So I say, it's not easy to make a spotlight and make a good forecast of the exact value in terms of the growth, because there are different dimensions and drivers when we create the burning platform to discuss, how it will affect. So globally, when you plan and when you make a forecast about the new job possibilities, and you are making, of course, your capacity building plans accordingly, but for sure, there are lots of drivers that you cannot control internally in local perspective and also global perspective. I'm not going in detail, but today, we see that there are lots of these are effects for decreasing the job opportunities, because we discuss about, for example, AI, Internet of Things, automation, these kind of things from the second civilization time. For last 50 years, I think we are discussing the automation. It started with maybe mass production, that it will decrease the jobs and take all the jobs of the people, workers. But we see that, it is vice versa, and it creates a lot of jobs at the end. And we see that there will be very sophisticated jobs, as well as some critical topics will be very important. For example, with the new technologies like electric bus and new transport modes, the professional drivers will be the most wanted job, one of the most wanted jobs. We were discussing, for example, it's not on the topic, but the flying taxis and the new modes that we are discussing, and it will be one of the wanted jobs. And it will be very sophisticated. And of course, with the new possibilities of electric vehicle and ITS, it will create a lot of new opportunities for the workers, I think. And local perspective, of course, it's not easy, because we see that in many territories, the voluntary non-workers are raising. You cannot control easily. So capacity of the part-time jobs, it will be increasing after, of course, the COVID-19 crisis. We see that at demand and intention to work partially, and not only home working, but also the working part-time jobs is raising. So it will, of course, affect the patterns, and it's not easy to forecast the exact value, but we obviously see that the job opportunities will be raising in coming future, especially with the new electric bus investments. So when you go next slides, maybe I can show what we are talking about with a lot of new jobs we call. As my colleagues or other speakers already mentioned, that with the new technology, it is not just upgrade of the Euro level of the engine. With the combustion engine, is totally different technology than the electric motor. Not only with the technology, the engine, but also the other components. So the totally different, the different vehicle technology, and it brings a lot of effects. So it will be a challenge to train the new workers, new management side, of course, as well, but also with the current staff. Now the operators has a big challenge to transfer this knowledge to the current staff, because it will not be easy to adapt the new circumstances, because the drivers of the operation is totally different. Not only the maintenance, we first think about the maintenance and the repair procedure are only different, but we see that there are other effects. So in the training needs, we see just in green, for example, you see what we expect the operator need to be trained, need to think about training for their staff. And for the orange one, you see that, for the people who, before coming to the operation, even for the research, design and development, production, there will be different structures and different technologies. We have to train them with this resourcing and technology, even with the mines and the element used in the battery technology is very limited, and we have to make a lot of investment on research for this one to replace the technology in battery, for example. But when you come to the operation, from strategy, starting with very high level, until the scrapping and also recycling the batteries and also the vehicles is very different, and we have to think about the capacity building of our workers and managers, how we can train them. So we, in academy, for example, we are working with our partners. GIZ is one of them, for example, and we are trying to compose some training program, and so it's one of the main challenge for everybody to provide this knowledge and transfer the new innovation to the market. So we are trying to differentiate the levels, and also with the different departments, so from starting with the procurement and until the operation. So now we face different challenges in many cities, because I can easily say half of the city already experienced and already met with the technology, the battery technologies in electric bus, but some of them are only making strategy, and they are meeting this technology very lately. So there are two different dimensions. So there are some operators who advance, but they have some challenges for the operations, scrapping or recycling or parts management, etc. But another side, the newcomers, some challenges for the planning, how to adapt the electric bus into their network design, and choosing the correct one, how to procure that, even from tender to commissioning. There are so different elements, all are linked. So we recommend to make a good plan and make the correct training need analysis to define the staff capacity building, of course, not only for staff, again, for also the new talents. So we should make it very attractive for the talents, new talents in the market, because it's becoming more sophisticated. But I think together with different parties, we are going to fulfill the requirements. So next slide, I don't know if we may have, yes. So there is no end for this topic, but I should ask also, I recommend to ask also when you are planning the training strategies, two things, what skills will we need? It's obvious. What are the skill gaps? So it is just the gap analysis, what's our plan to address them. So it should be very clear in our strategy when we start implementing these electric bus technologies, and what the investment or initiatives needed in talent and resourcing to support our operation with zero emission buses. So it's all. I don't know if I did. I hope I didn't exceed my time, but if you have any questions later on, maybe we'll collect them. Thank you very much. For now, it's from my side.
Thank you very much, Emre, for your very detailed contribution. You were just on time. We are good now on the time. And now we will introduce Marah Köberle. I hope it is very close pronounced. We will check that because she is part of this panel we want to create on training and job generation. Marah is Program Manager in Mobility and Circular Economy at the Siemens Foundation. Today, Marah will share her experiences on training needs and productive use of e-mobility in Western Kenya with us. Working and living in Africa, the US, Europe, and Asia, she gained experience in the private sector and initiated partnerships and managed projects in the food industry, vocational training, waste management, mobility, and consumer goods with focus on East Africa country. Please, Marah.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, and I'm really happy to be here. And as well, thanks a lot for the previous speakers already introducing the topic so well. So yeah, I brought a presentation, and like different to the previous speakers, I'm actually really focusing on the micro level here. So next slide, please. In the framework of a GIZ-funded project, which was co-funded by Siemens Foundation, we are looking to how can e-mobility increase economic capacity, tackling unemployment, and provide clean transport solutions, especially for people at the base of the pyramid. So next slide, please. Stefanie mentioned how important the small-scale e-mobility is in her keynote today, and I can fully support that. So Siemens Foundation works with startup and social enterprise partners, and this is just some selected of our portfolio. So we have like e-cargo bikes, there's e-bike conversion and e-bike production. There's a partner who's doing e-outboard engines for fishing boats, but as well cargo bikes or light trucks. So we have like a different portfolio set that we're testing, not only in Kenya, but in Western Kenya, we have a focus. Next slide, please. So, like, why is e-mobility so interesting for low and middle income countries? In the end, for green growth, or as a job generation, we already heard a bit about it in a previous presentation. So there's a lot of different skills and jobs that are needed. You could say from charging and battery and energy production to production and R&D of assets, but as well of software solutions. Of course, then there are the riders like productive use, taxi riders, agriculture, transport, water transport. We have service and maintenance of the fleets, but then of course as well end of life, second use of batteries and recycling. And of course, in all of those, we have like a very different skill set. So some jobs are generated on like vocational training levels. Other really need like, let's say, engineering or quite high skills. But I think that's as well the beauty of the topic, that like a lot of people can benefit from e-mobility when we're talking jobs. And next slide, please. So today, as said, it's a bit of a micro deep dive, because with our partner HL Consulting, we conducted a training needs assessment for e-mobility technician in Western Kenya. So we already heard about skills mapping and skills gap analysis before, but then it's important to see as well what kind of trainings are offered, and as well like what can be the strategy. So in the end, like there were different country occupational profiles, but as well company needs were assessed through interviews. A data collection of technicians was taking place last year in Homa Bay and Migori County, which is at the shore of Lake Victoria, and 74 mechanics were interviewed. So in the end, one of the findings is already in Kenya or in Western Kenya, there's no e-mobility specific training in place. So in the end, that's why different training programs like automotive programs, motorcycle programs, or boat engine programs were taken into account to see which skills could be like transferred to the e-mobility space. Next slide, please. So in the end, like, of course, in such a short time, we cannot really, I cannot like tell you everything that we learned. But what was quite interesting, I think, is that only 24% of the mechanics that were interviewed attended formal training at all. So it's really informal sector. In Kenya, it's often called jua kali. Jua means hot, and sun, and Kali means hot. So it's the mechanics or like the workers that work under the hot sun on the side of the road. So already here we see it's really important that we include informal sector in the training and in the programs from the beginning, because it's very relevant, at least for the servicing and maintenance part. What we can see as well is that from the ones who did attend training, that's like the table on the right down, some actually attended training in the internet. Like others did short courses, and some had formal training, and others did apprenticeship. So like there's quite a mix. I have to say I was quite surprised about the 14% internet, because I think that's quite innovative as well to get training and up-to-date knowledge. Next slide, please. So of course now there's the question, so how to train? So 95% of the technicians that were interviewed indicated that they were willing to acquire e-mobility technical skills. So they were really open to say, yes, we want to enhance our skills to service these new bikes and understand more, especially like engine, battery, and maybe as well what's new about the technology. The questions about like price, like how could these workers that are all kind of from informal sector, how much would they pay? That was quite different. So some said they could pay $10 and others up to $300. In average, it was around $90. As well, when they were asked like how a training could look like, because all those people are already employed, there was like a preference for short courses, and maybe not full-time, but like courses could take up to 2 months on a part-time basis, so that like after 2 months, maybe there's a certificate or some new skills that then can be used in the sector. Yeah, so the willingness to pay, in the end, we had like a 50-50 result, more or less, of people who were willing to pay or not. What was interesting there is from these 3 locations you see, Homa Bay is more peri-urban, Sorry is very rural. So we see a lot more willingness to pay for training in the more urban setting, and like less willingness to pay in the more rural setting. That's maybe an interesting observation for designing training programs as well. Next slide, please. So now in the end, what's really interesting is like, what do we do with these results and how can we move forward? So for us, like in the foundation, but yeah, we cooperate with GIZ and of course as well with the Kenyan government, we think that there should be like a two-way strategy. So on the short term, taking into account who's in the market, and as well there are more and more motorbikes growing, like entering the market. E-mobility still has a very low share in Kenya, but still it's growing, and I think it will be one of the future markets. That's as well, we see sector associations forming, the government is drafting policies, so like it will be a future sector. So on the short term, it's really important that like the workers that are there can be upgraded so they can be part of the e-mobility revolution. And here it's important, as we just saw, short courses, maybe blended learning, of course like curricular or certificate courses, but as well on-the-job training to make it easy for the workers that are already there to participate. Then for the long-term strategy, it will be good to have a full curriculum, because that means that like training institutions as well, like government decides this is like a future sector to invest in. But like a curriculum has like a longer way to develop. Like involvement of the industry is really important to have like the industrial needs, but as well the market needs there. And normally like to start a curriculum in Kenya, there's a sector skills advisory committee. So a lot of like interviews and needs are like established. Then the occupational standards are developed as well, like it's compared to what other countries are already doing. And then at some point the curriculum will be there. But this is like more like a long-term strategy, which might take like 2 or 3 years or even longer. So yes, so that's like in the end the direction we will go into. And like, yeah, I'm looking forward for your questions, and yeah, very happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Marah, for this very insightful presentation. We're also very happy to have you here, and I'm also very happy because I think it complements quite well the content of the workshop. We have seen different modes, also different levels, and I would like to start now our panel discussion with you two. The first question would be for Emre. We would like to know what are the main challenges that cities have to build up the capacities for e-mobility. I know that UITP works a lot with different cities. So in your experience, what's the main challenge to build up these capacities? I think I cannot hear the sound well. Okay.
Sorry, it was me. Yeah, as you see, there are a lot of challenges that we are facing, and we are working on this. Actually, one of the topics that we are trying to address. Unfortunately, we are expecting to finalize the report in coming months, but you know, there are a lot of challenges for the city who has started this initiative with electric bus. Is of course for the technical side is very important, and also for the management side, we see that to understand the total cost of ownership is one of the main topics that we need to take into account. You know, we see that with the combustion engine, it was very different to calculate the ownership or the cost of the ownership. But here with electric bus, we have a lot of value that we offer the city, and we should take into account the different dimensions. So for the managerial perspective and for the strategic side, we should be increase the awareness of this value of the electric mobility, green zero emission buses. So it is one of the challenge for the management side, and also for the communication with the public, of course, it will be another challenge. So it should be addressed very well. So these are some of the challenges. Of course, there are a lot of technical challenges that the operators need to adapt themselves for sure.
Now, I would like to address Marah with a question that is, how did the corona pandemic impact the delivery of training? Do you have learnings of the post-corona times that you can share with us?
Yeah, and unfortunately, sorry, was that for me or was it for you?
You can start, Marah, and then Emre, of course, you can complement.
Yes. I think everyone is impacted by COVID. So actually, training was affected badly because this is mostly on-the-job training, and together with our startup and social enterprise partners, we developed a pilot training to test with the mechanics to see if an on-the-job training that takes maybe some weeks, that if that goes in the right way. So we have the curricula, we have as well the trainers who could do it, but due to COVID, it wasn't possible to test it until now, because we always thought, okay, numbers are going down and maybe it's relaxing a bit, but actually when I'm speaking today in Western Kenya, the numbers are really going up. So time after time we had to postpone it. I hope we can still test the pilot training before the end of the year. But yeah, it's high contact. It's really hard, I think, to work together on a motorbike and to stay away. So unfortunately, there's no, let's say, the training test could not happen yet.
Perhaps Emre, want to compliment?
Yeah, I would like to compliment, because the UITP Academy deliver the white-collar staff training program, and of course we are also affected. You know, we have to postpone some of the physical training program. In the past, we are delivering some online courses, but it was just complementary for the physical courses. But we had to adapt ourselves, of course. Interestingly, we have increased the people that registered the training program after we convert our physical training into virtual classrooms. So it was a little bit adapted, and the market also easy to adapt, especially for the manager side, maybe white-collar stuff. But of course, I agree, it's not easy for the technicians to get all this kind of training program, because they need more on-site trainings.
Thank you. That's very interesting to see how, well, there are indeed some possibilities within a pandemic to switch for certain groups. For others, it's more challenging, I understand. Emre, I would like to ask you another question. Are there certain aspects of training which usually tend to be forgotten or not considered? For example, recycling. Are there such aspects?
I hope not, but we are trying to evolve our training programs, of course, every day, and we are working on it. I can say that we organize almost every 2 months a new training program, and every time we are trying to adapt ourselves with the new needs. So we are trying to understand what is needed in the market. But for sure, at the beginning, it was one of the missing points, as you say, the scraping, or nobody was enough discussing about the battery scraping or recycling technologies or need, how to do it, because at that time we observed that the life of the battery is at least 5 to 10 years. So it was not the main concern at the beginning. So of course, in the training program, we were trying to point out, but not much, I can say. I don't want to say we've forgotten, but maybe not enough addressed at the beginning. But now currently we are working on it to make it a very important point, in one of the important sessions in our training programs. But the operators also need to think about different dimension of the batteries, scraping it, because not only operation, but also after the operation, we have to think about how you recycle, especially the batteries, not only vehicle, because you cannot easily, there is not enough economically profitable recycling technology for batteries at the moment. There are a lot of research on it. The mines are limited for some elements, which are the inputs of the battery. So it's a must to have a good strategy for recycling of the batteries, for example. So one of the main concern and challenge, and we are willing to address in coming days, of course.
And if we want to complement this question, and this is to Marah regarding the Kenya case, there is a broad alternative in which field to train and not to forget something, but in this specific case, how to identify the training needs in order to focus and not to do everything, because it's not possible to do that.
Yes, I think it's really important to see at what point of the value chain do you want to put the training? Are we talking about like R&D or manufacturing? So in our case, we realized because like the training and the training needs analysis is only one part of the project. So we do test the motorbikes and the electric cargo bikes in the market, and it was very clear that there's like no real let's say, skilled workers that were in touch with e-mobility out there in the repairs and service. And that's then when we decided, okay, let's start with the repair and service technicians, because that's relevant for a lot of different vehicle types. And then starting with the training needs analysis. So kind of seeing, okay, what could be kind of the baseline, like which skills are needed, what is there in the market, and then you have the gap and you can see what you train on. So I think it's really important to, not train everywhere, but really see what is needed in the market at what point, and like what is as well hampering a scale of e-mobility in the area.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for this panel discussion, Emre and Marah. Unfortunately, due to time reason, we still have some questions available, but due to time reason, I think we have to move to the closing of our workshop. So thank you very much for participating in the Transporting Climate Change Week. And now we would like to, close this workshop. We hope very much that you liked the session and are now inspired to embark on activities that really foster e-mobility.
Yeah, we were able to develop the 3 blocks and also to receive questions from the colleagues that are assisting through the chat. Always we would like to continue, but time is saying that we need to close. Thank you very much for all the colleagues that assist here, trying to give their insight, and we are very pleased with the content we could develop here. Thank you, Corinna.
Thank you, Ernesto. You're a great co-moderator.